Aloha, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sean Lether, your host. Thanks for being with us tonight, whether you're joining us live on Zoom or watching the replay on YouTube. I'm delighted and honored to welcome our special guest, Mark Ireland, author, experiencer, and co-founder of Helping Parents Heal. Mark is widely recognized for his work exploring consciousness, the afterlife, and evidence suggesting that our connections with loved ones continue beyond physical death. Through his research, writing, and personal experiences, he has helped countless thousands of people find comfort, hope, and a deeper understanding of life's biggest questions. You can learn more about Mark and his work by going to markirelandauthor.com. I will stick a link in the chat. Today, Mark is going to share insights from his work and experiences, and we'll have an opportunity to learn from his unique perspective. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mark Ireland. Welcome,
Well, thanks so
Mark.
much for having me, Sean.
This is such an honor. I've been excited to have you as a speaker for a long time, and so glad you're here. So thank you. And maybe if you could just start off with your life growing up, what it was like having a famous medium father, and then uh, what progressed after that. And I also want to mention, and I'm sure you know this, but Mark's father was influential in creating the method that Hawaii Remote Viewing Association uses, which many of you remember Niam when he was our speaker, and he uses the method for remote viewing that Mark's father Richard came up with. So, thank you, Mark. You want to take it
Sure
from?
thing. Well, first off, I felt it was appropriate that I wear an aloha shirt since this is the Hawaiian remote. I'm sorry, the Hawaiian IANDS. So, yeah, my dad, it's interesting because I never knew anything about his involvement with remote viewing. But I think he had to sign NDAs or whatever. And a man named Glenn Wheaton reached out to me probably, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. And he had told me that he had met my dad a number of years earlier in Waikiki. My dad was doing a psychic demonstration in a public venue, and Glenn at the time was in the military, special forces, and he was involved with the whole remote viewing thing to some extent. And he had developed an organization called the Hawaiian Remote Viewers Guild, and they're going to see my father and thought, wow, this is really impressive, but this guy might be a fake. So let's ask him if he's willing to come to our place and be tested. So they asked him and he agreed. So that he went to their facility, wherever that was, and they ran a number of tests on him. They put a plaster over his eyes so he couldn't see. And then if he tried to fiddle with it, it would crack. So they would know. And then they had him, say what was here or what was there and identify all these things. And he kind of blew him away. And then from there, they, according to Glenn, got my dad involved with the military, and his, I guess, coup de grace moment was identifying some POWs in Laos, and even providing dog tag numbers and things like this. But Glenn said that they created or built all their protocols around what they learned from my father and his methodology for psychic phenomena, remote viewing. I just think of remote viewing as clairvoyance at a distance. We always try and box things into human terminology, but I think it's clairvoyance has been around a lot longer than the term remote viewing, but it sounds a little more technical, I guess. Um, but
And they
I
made
just
a
go back to
movie
my
about it.
childhood, and yeah, I grew up with
Uh,
a very
What was
unusual
it
father.
about? Do you remember the
Pardon?
movie? Remember they made a movie about it. Something goats.
Yeah, I didn't see that. The Men Who Stare at Goats, I believe, is
Yeah,
what it was. Yeah,
yeah.
I'll have to go.
You
I
can
think
watch it
George
on,
Clooney was in that.
yeah, on Amazon. I watched it. It's
Was
actually
it worthwhile?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Especially when you know of the people that are involved that it's based on. It's actually fascinating, I think.
I know Joe McGonigal, I think it is one of their top people, and there's a Ian Swan. Is it Ian Swan? Swan, I know that much. And then anyhow.
Yeah.
But going back in time, again, I didn't even know about this till I was contacted by Glenn Wheaton. But just growing up as a kid, my father had his own church. It was a very progressive church for the time. And within that, he would demonstrate the gifts of the Spirit. And I guess I just saw it in my daily life, psychic phenomena. Dad always knew what was going on. You couldn't get away with stuff. But I was really most encouraged when I would see him do demonstrations and bring through spirit communication. So I know everyone here is very familiar with near-death experience phenomena, even either as an experiencer or you're interested in it, and you've read about it, and there's a whole body of different phenomena that are supportive of the idea that consciousness is actually primary and therefore extends beyond the death of the physical body. NDEs, shared death experiences, ADCs, which I guess mediumship could be considered an ADC, after death communication. You have deathbed visions and terminal lucidity, reincarnation, all those things. But my real area of expertise and knowledge is in the mediumship, and it's mainly for two reasons. One, because I grew up with the father I did, and even though I didn't follow in his footsteps, from an early age, I saw him bring through messages that resonated with people to an extent that they would break down in tears of joy because he'd share the names of someone that they loved who had passed and specific information about them that only they knew. And so it resonated in me to know, wow, really there is more. I don't really understand how it all works, but clearly there's something beyond just this physical existence. And I carried that forward. Now, I went down a very traditional path. I um, got a degree, went into the business world, got married at a young age, and had two kids, two young boys. When I was like 25 when I became a father, and then 27 the second time. So I was just cruising along, and then really focused on my career and all this, probably as far as away from my dad's world as you could be. Not that I ever disregarded it or disrespected it in any ways. It was always there. And I always thought in spiritual terms, like how to treat people and that, I'm more than a body and those kinds of things. But I was, living in that business world until unexpectedly my 18-year-old son passed away on a mountain in Scottsdale, Arizona, behind our home. And that drew me back into my dad's world because I was feeling a deep, deep pain, as anyone would who had a child pass. And then a lot of synchronistic events started happening and lining up to where I really couldn't refute them. And I felt like, I think this is really kind of my life's purpose, and it's bigger and more important than anything I've done in the business world to this point. So it was back in 2004. My son Brandon, he went on a hike with some buddies behind the house in the McDowell Mountains in Scottsdale. And he climbed there a lot with friends. And so it shouldn't have been any big deal. But that particular day, I just got this weird feeling and I tried to talk him out of going. He went anyhow. And later that day, we got this emergency call because we were on the other end of town, came back, and there's a ambulance, fire truck, helicopter, a horde of people. And they introduced me to a chaplain right away, and I knew that wasn't good. So it was a short time later I was informed that he had passed, but they didn't really know the cause of death. Just that his buddies had said that he had been passing out. He felt funny, had numbness in his limbs and things. It was 3 days later I spoke to my uncle. Now my uncle had abilities similar to my father, but by this point, my dad had passed on not a number of years earlier, actually 12 years earlier, but my uncle was still around. He lived in Tucson, and I was in the mortuary making um, plans, and my uncle and I connected by cell phone, and he said, "Hey, Mark, I wanted to let you know, I tried to meditate last night, but I couldn't get anything. But this morning I was in meditation, and your dad came to me and he wanted you to know that he was there when Brandon crossed over. Brandon was a little confused, but your dad helped him adjust and understand what was happening. And Brandon wanted you to know you're the best parents he ever could have had. And that's the nice thing we like to hear. But then supplementing that, he said, your dad said that Brandon's death was caused by a lack of oxygen in his bloodstream that caused his heart to fail. 2 days later, I get a call from the autopsy physician, and she says, Yeah, your son's death was caused by a severe asthma attack that drove his blood oxygen levels down, causing cardiac arrest. So that was kind of the first domino. So my uncle basically gave me the cause of death along with the nice message before I had the autopsy results. And then things just started happening. One thing that I did on my own because I wanted a sort of a direct connection, I went into a darkened closet, walk-in closet, shut the door, and just tried to quietly meditate. And I'm not a great meditator, but I closed my eyes, and before long, I got a visual of my son's face kind of scrolling across my mind's eye. He was smiling and joyful looking. I felt a glow around him, actually. I thought, wow, this is nice. But then right after that, I got a symbol, and it was a cross with an oval loop at the top. And I'd seen people wear those, but I didn't know what they represented. So I then Googled it, and someone wants to talk to me afterwards. Okay. Uh, um, I Googled it and found out it's an Ankh. It's the oldest cross of human history, with the lower portion symbolizing physical life and the oval loop at the top symbolizing eternal life. And that gave me kind of what I felt was a coded message or a puzzle to be solved, because I do have an analytical side to myself. I feel like I used to be pretty far left brain, and now I'm a little more right. I'm probably pretty much in the middle. But as a result of that, I got this puzzle that was more satisfying than if I'd have just seen the smiling face because I got the symbol along with it. 3 weeks after Brandon passed, I was watching the local news on the NBC affiliate in Phoenix, and they were showing excerpt about a mediumship study being done at the University of Arizona that involved mediums in blinded conditions giving readings to sitters they couldn't see. And this particular episode had Alison Dubois before she was well known from the show Medium. And so she was given readings these people she could not see. And there was a lot of detailed information. It was not like, oh, your grandma's here or anything like that. It was, very specific about different people. And one person I remember, had loved to gamble, roulette tables in Vegas, and loved pizza or whatever it was. But it was not just general stuff. It was highly specific. And then afterward, they debriefed with the sitters, the people that were there receiving the reading, and it was all pretty much right on the money. I thought, wow, she's really good. I'd love to get a reading from her. I'd love to be in this lab as a sitter someday. And both things would later happen. Um, Ironically, the very next day, I get a call from a man named Jerry Conser, who had been friends with my father. Jerry had helped my dad back in the late 60s and early 70s do ESP workshops where my dad would teach other people how to develop psychic abilities if they're interested in doing so. And then later, Jerry had the idea of coming to my dad with maps of Texas counties to identify positions of oil fields. And they had some success with that too. And it was mainly my dad's interest was more to support parapsychology research that was taking place at the time. So anyhow, so this here it is a day after I see that excerpt with Alison Dubois, the University of Arizona, and Jerry calls me. He says, "Hey, Mark, I know what you've been through. I know someone who might be able to help you. Her name's Alison Dubois, and here's a phone number you can call to get an appointment." And so even then, even though Medium hadn't come out on the network, it was she was very popular and had a long wait list. So I did get in to see her in August. 2 weeks before I saw her, a gentleman who knew my dad gave me a box, and inside the box was a set of papers, 8.5 by 11 type manuscript that said Your Psychic Potential, A Guide to Psychic Development by Dr. Richard Ireland, dated 1973. I said, well, what's this? He goes, well, it's a book your dad wrote. It's never been published. I said, well, um, you've had this for 12 years. Why did you give it to me now? He says, I don't know. I just feel like I'm supposed to. 2 weeks later, I have the reading with Allison, and like one of the first things she says to me is, I've got your father here. He's showing me a book, but I think it's his book. But he's handing it to you to take forward. Does that make sense? I'm like, yeah, it makes sense. So anyhow, that was a tremendous reading, even beyond that. And that particular book, I was later able to get published on his behalf, posthumously. Um, so the reading with Allison had a lot of details about my son and things that brought a lot of comfort. I ended up having a series of readings with different mediums early on that that really helped the family and helped me, and a series of other kinds of synchronistic events happened subsequently. So fast forwarding to, I think it was early 2010, I was then doing workshops and speaking events, and I had one in Phoenix, and a woman who had just moved there from Florida during a break came up to me and she says, "Hey, I I'm already a medium." She goes, "I came to this event because I wanted to meet other like-minded people." I said, "Great." She goes, "And and ironically, I recently met a mom whose son also passed on a mountain, although it was the Himalayas. Um, he was at the base camp for Mount Everest, and they took this bus. It was a school bus trip. They took it up too rapidly, and he ended up getting altitude sickness and dying." So this medium, Suzanne Wilson's her name, and she said, "Well," I said, "You know what? Why don't you give a copy?" By that time, I'd come out with my first book, my memoir, which is experience all the experiences I've described to you so far, and some others as well. Um, I said, "Give this copy to Elizabeth," or I didn't even have the name at the time. I said, "Give this to the woman." Had a card in there, said, "If she'd like to talk to me, she can contact me." And it wasn't but like maybe 2 days later, she calls me and says, "Hey, Mark, I read your book in one or two sittings. I loved it. I want to meet you and your wife. Can we get together?" So we got together, and I think she said that she had an organization started. It was basically a Facebook group called Parents United in Loss. And she says, "I'm going to do my first in-person meeting in 2 weeks. Will you be my inaugural speaker?" I'm like, "Okay, sure, I can do that." And so I go to this, and it's very successful. It's 30, 40 people here. In fact, some of the people that are watching right now were part of that, like Doris Norwood, who's on our board today. So we she starts doing these meetings once a month. I come to some, I don't come to all. And then later on, a medium I later would meet, Tina Powers, who's exceptional. She's out of Tucson. She said, "Mark, I think your real mission in life is to help other parents who have been through what you've been through. And I think you might want to consider starting an organization." And so I started mulling it over, and I thought, there's no sense reinventing the wheel here. Elizabeth has a group that works, but it's only one location. Doesn't have a website, no newsletter. So I reached out to her and I said, "Hey, Elizabeth, would you have any interest in maybe taking what you've got with this one group and like blowing it out? I'll help you with the website, newsletter, put together a board, and try and blueprint what you do in your meetings and get other affiliate locations." And she was all over it. And I said, "And maybe a new name like Helping Parents Heal." And she goes, "Oh, I love that name." And that's how it started. Initially, I think we probably had a half a dozen affiliates in the first year or so. And then there was a certain point where it just gained all this inertia, and we just got more and more and more. And today we have 170 plus affiliates worldwide, 31,000 members. And then we have a conference every other year, including this year. It draws 1,100 people. We sell out an entire resort, and we bring in a lot of top presenters and speakers. Um, I would say, on the NDE side, Dr. Mary Neal's going to be at this one. We have some top mediums like Suzanne Giesman, Mark Anthony. We had last time Gordon Smith, James Van Prague. So some top people, and then we have some therapy related people. Um, and so we provide a broad spectrum. So I've kind of gone off on a wide tangent here, but that's how Helping Parents Heal started. And so it's just like my life has kind of evolved with all this, and that things just start happening or people show up in my life that guide me in a way that seems beyond chance. Um, Another experience I always like to share because it's just so unusual, and it's a direct experience, not just through mediums. I see somebody posted a question here. Right now, Helping Parents Heal is limited to parents, although we have extensions for for siblings, and then also fathers. There's a fathers group because what we found is that the fathers tended to be more clammed up, and our membership was like 90% women. and the guys were bottling it up. But by creating that where the guys can get together in a safe environment and just share, that's really blossomed as well. And the conference, it's everybody. But yeah, I know it would be nice if there were other groups to, take care of a variety of situations, but we're really focused on parents who've had kids pass. It's it's a very unique thing, and it's one of the toughest things in life. I can share that directly with you. Not to diminish anybody else's loss, be it a spouse or friends or anything else. But that's really been our mission from day one. So
Let me just real
I'm going to
quick.
take a break and let you ask any questions you may have because I've been
Yeah, yeah.
rambling for a
First of
while.
all, for the people that want to put the questions in the chat, if you can just wait until Mark is done sharing his story, and then we'll have a Q&A session. But I just wanted to mention that when you said you went off on a tangent, no, that the loss of your son was a total transformation for you. So I thought maybe you could share a little more about that, because helping parents heal happened as a result of probably the most awful tragedy that a parent could suffer.
Yeah, it was a catalyst, no doubt, because it took my life in a different direction. I had no intention of following in my father's footsteps. Not that I'm seeking to be a medium or a psychic, although I do have some of those abilities in a latent way, and I've tested them a bit and experimented just for my own knowledge and understanding, and also to better get a feel for like what the experience is like for the mediums that I work with, because I have developed a certification program over the years. It's been operating more than 10 years, and it was really to develop a list of vetted mediums for people who were searching. Because after my first book came out, I got inundated with people like, who's a good medium? Who can I trust? Who can I see? And I thought, wow, this is really important, for people to go to vetted sources if they're interested in going down this path. And because it is a healing thing that can be. I don't encourage, people to become medium addicts to where they're getting readings all the time, but it can be a piece of the puzzle, definitely.
But
But so yeah, I developed this program to basically test people under blinded conditions on Zoom, no video, audio only, with limited feedback from the sitter. And it's again, this was not really to be like a scientific explanation, or I mean a research project, but more just to provide vetted resources that I knew these people could actually do this, and really measuring the accuracy of the information they shared, but even more than that, the evidence, like, are they able to bring forth evidential statements? Because those are the things that really, really help folks. And I guess that would lead me into talk about what I call the five pillars of healing.
yeah, before you
Um,
go there though, I wanted to
yeah.
understand. So your son crossed over, your uncle the next day, right? Because he didn't have anything the
Well, it was the third day,
third day. And
ironically.
and then he said that your son was with your father,
Hmm.
and your father said that he was fine, but he was a little confused.
Hmm.
And then, so was the next thing you did, is that when you booked the appointment with um Dubois?
No,
Or
that was 3 weeks later, because that's when I watched that TV excerpt. And
uh-huh.
then I got the call the very next day from that gentleman, Jerry Conser, offering that up. Somewhere in between was the issue or the experience I had with the Ankh and my son's face. I can't remember, but that was closer to when my uncle gave me that. So, I would say, the first few weeks after you go through something like this is the toughest part and where you're most fragile. And we're going through that heavy grief. Um, so when, getting that thing from my uncle was very helpful, but it doesn't cure everything. There is a physiological part to grief that you have to go through. You can't really avoid it. And if you bottle it up and tuck it away, it's just going to surface later and bog you down. So we're having to deal with that both on a spiritual level, a mental, and emotional, all those levels, and to just deal with that stuff head on. So
And
it
so
was,
did
yeah,
you deal with
in
it?
chronologically, it was my it was, the Ankh and my uncle were within a day or two of each other. Then the Dubois thing was, the excerpt that I saw on TV happened 3 weeks after that. And then the actual reading with Allison was in August, which would have been another 8 months later. But something else happened 6 months after he passed that was one of the strongest, most crazy things that's ever happened. And it was just another in the series and of unbelievable things that occurred that were very healing. And that was, let me go back. Really, I forgot about this. 2 weeks after, I did see someone who did a reading for me. And it was just like the first person I could think of. And she did a good job. But one thing she told me that really stood out, she says, in 6 months, you'll see Brandon and you'll see him at the side of your bed. I thought, well, that's great. I'd love to have that happen. Well, 6 months later, we went on a cruise. It was a week-long cruise. We took our older son, Steven, and we took Brandon's best buddy, Stu. Stu had been there trying to resuscitate Brandon on the side of the mountain and went through a lot of, really hard times as a result of losing his buddy that way. And he was trying to help, but he couldn't help. Well, before we went on the cruise, Brandon was a bass player. And so a friend named James Linton or Jim Linton reached out and asked if he could borrow Brandon's bass because he had a studio. He was a guitar player and he was a singer and a songwriter, but he didn't have a bass guitar. So we said, yeah, sure, you can borrow that. Now, the way we met James is really interesting because he was actually climbing the mountain that Brandon was climbing that day. And he came upon the group of friends that Brandon had while Brandon's laying on his back and Stu's trying to resuscitate him. And James got there and he tried to help, but he was too late. And he always felt bad about that. And he was like saying, God, why didn't you let me help? Why was I there if I couldn't help? Well, we found him by going on the online obituary. He had written a note to us in the obituary and said, I was there when your son passed. I'm happy to answer any questions. Everything was done for him that was possible. And he gave us the contact info. So we connected with him and then we became friends. We would go see him play at different venues and things like that. So here it is. Fast forward. We're at the 6 month mark. We're going to go on this cruise. We loan James Brandon's bass guitar. We're gone for a week. We come back. And as soon as we get into the house, my wife, Susie, she sits at the foot of our bed. And while she's sitting there, she feels the presence of another person next to her. And out of her peripheral vision, she sees a shadow figure and she knows it's Brandon. She just knows it. And then I came into the room talking loudly and kind of broke up the process, which I felt bad about. But the very next day, James called, or Jim, he goes by Jim now. He was James to us back then. And he says, hey, Susie, I've got to tell you something, but I don't know how to tell you. And she thought he'd broken the bass, but that wasn't it. He said, I was in the studio recording this song. And while I was in there, I felt another presence in there with me. And I saw a shadow figure out of my peripheral vision. And I saw flashes of white light. And I thought, oh, I'm hallucinating. I better drink some water, better get some food, better take a shower. He said, but each time he came back, it got stronger and stronger. And then he said, at that point, he just said, okay, Brandon, what do you want? And then when he made that a statement, it kind of opened up to him to redo this bass line in the song that he'd been working on and change the lyrics. And he says, this is the best song I've ever written, but I didn't write it. It's called On the Other Side. So it was actually a great song. If anyone wants to hear it, there's a link to it on the media page of my website. But that was pretty phenomenal. Not only for my wife to have the visual and feeling of my son there, but then to have confirmation from another person the next day who knew nothing about it. So, pretty cool stuff. So, all of these kinds of spiritual experiences just led me down a path of knowing that I was to be part of this. I've always been interested in the research part too, the experiential part. I always wondered why science didn't take these things seriously or really look at the evidence. Then found out and discovered and understood that, unfortunately, materialistic science is still the predominant paradigm in academia. And it's like political suicide for some of the folks to do this kind of research. into these areas or these fields, which is really a shame because they're really the most important questions of all. So, not only do I have my own mediumship certification program, I've recently gotten involved in a research project too with a PhD in a neuroscientist with a PhD, and then an AI developer who we basically put together a program. I'm not going to spill the beans on the whole thing now. I'll come back later and tell you more about it, but it's actually using AI as a tool to automate the testing process and eliminate some of the complaints that people have had, that are the materialists have had in the past, skeptical materialists about protocols and sensory leakage and things like that. So I'm anxious to see how it goes. We're just getting started, and maybe by the next time I come back, we'll have some results to report and hopefully a journal article to write.
That sounds exciting. So, so your dad, what was it like having a famous medium father like that was? And by the way, if you go to Mark Ireland's author.com, there's a link to Richard, his dad's site, Richard Ireland, and you can see a lot of the stuff there. It's pretty fascinating. What
Yeah, I
was
have a
that
few
like?
other videos.
Pardon me?
Pardon?
What was that like
I,
growing up with him as a dad?
well, like I said earlier, you couldn't get away with a whole lot. So dad pretty much knew what you were doing, and he said that he tried to let us, have a certain amount of freedom and not try to intervene, but he intervened. It mainly affected my older brother, at the time, who, because he was 10 years older than me, and my parents split when I was probably, I don't know how old I was, 11 years old or something. So my older brother during his teen years had to really deal with that. He had somebody buying him beer when he was underage, and my dad's stopped that. And my dad brother was drag racing his car. My dad stopped that. And I think I maybe shared this story with you. This is one of my favorites, but it was involving my mom and dad when they were first married. She had tried to be a vegetarian for, a couple of months and had been successful. And then one day she got a hankering for a burger, went out for this burger, and came back home. And later that evening, Dad comes in, and the first words out of his mouth are, "So, Shirley, did you enjoy your burger today?" So that's what it was like. But the better side of it, though, for me was just, I thought it was really cool, and I was proud to let my friends know about it. And he even had like a syndicated TV show in Phoenix when I was a kid, and they could watch that. Um, but I think it was the survival of consciousness piece, the life after death piece that always that I enjoyed the most, that I appreciated the most, that gave me the most comfort and confidence too. Whereas, I met a lot of people that are horribly afraid of death, and I've not had that, fortunately. They're either afraid, because maybe they grew up in an atheistic household and they're afraid of the annihilation of themselves, that they're gone forever. It's dust to dust. Or they grew up in a very fundamentalist household where they feared, what would happen to them in the afterlife because they didn't make the right choices or whatever. So I didn't have that. I see our purpose here is a little bit different. I see it more as a evolution of the soul, a process of intermingling with others, and sharing experiences and doing your best work to serve and to help other people along the way, and round yourself out, and to become more than you were and help the world in the process. So, yeah, my dad, he influenced me in many ways. He was a very loving man. He was non-judgmental. He would embrace all kinds of people. He brought more people into our home to live temporarily than you could shake a stick at, people who were either down and out or had issues or whatever, And as a kid, you didn't really understand who's this and why are they here? But, he lived the stuff that a lot of people preach. And I appreciated that about my father.
How are the neighbors and stuff? Were they cool with?
Oh, it varied. Some people were and some people weren't. When, you think back to the 60s and 70s was a little bit different than now. So he was
Yeah.
really a pioneer in many ways too. And even like I said, like most of the demonstrations I have videos of are psychic demonstrations because back then it had to be presented almost, I don't want to say a novelty, but kind of like more um, like you wouldn't go on and do mediumship readings on network TV back then. You wouldn't have a show like Crossing Over with John Edward or things like that. So it was more the ESP part, and that the credibility from that was my dad always pointed to things like Duke University lab run by J.B. Rhine and all the telepathy tests they'd been doing and the validations from that kind of a thing. So it was a different era, you know. I think if he was here today, people would just be blown away and he would be able to show much more. But, I think there are trailblazers in every field, and he was one in this particular field, and he served his purpose. And I feel like part of if you believe in pre-life planning, maybe I cut a deal with him to come and pick up what he had started and carry it forward because we are different people, I'd say I'm probably more conservative and more he was more carefree, I would say, live for the day. And I've always been a little more cautious and careful and things. And so, even presenting his message and his work, which I've been doing, and I'm working on another book now too, to that end, is to present it in the right light, and take a journalistic approach. And that's maybe part of the reason that I've never really sought to become the next version of my dad or to be a practicing medium or whatever, because, well, for one thing, it's a hard act to follow. It's kind of like Michael Jordan's son following him or something, or look at LeBron's son. He's got a ways to go. Sorry. But as much as that, it's a lot of responsibility too. You're dealing with people in grief and they're fragile. So we all want to be right and we want to be helpful. So I think it's just something where if I was to do that, I'd have to dive in with both feet and be completely committed to like, hey, that's what I'm going to do and that's what I want to be. But the minute I do that, then I kind of lose the ability to be the objective journalist, in this field. And so that's kind of my decision making going forward. Like, what do I really want to do, and where am I at with things?
So speaking of soul contracts and life plans, do you think you had to go out in the world and get the business degrees and experience that part of the material worlds before you could then come back to where you are now and everything? Do you
I
think
do actually in my degrees in political science because I was going to go to law school and change my mind, but it actually ended up being a better degree for business than a business degree because what it teaches you is critical thinking and writing skills and things like that. So I think it gave me the skills to effectively communicate both in written and oral fashion, and to also interact with people and learn how to present, learn how to convey a message to people and things like that. So I think there was that aspect of it to grow in confidence over the years as I went on in the business world. And then just to understand how things work in the world too, Um, and so, like to take a message like my father's and to take just the topic of mediumship, and afterlife, after death communication, and put that in words that can be digested by the average layperson in the US and where they understand what you're trying to say is, you know, I think all of those things are probably partially influenced by the fact that I did go to college, got a degree, and learned a lot in the process, not just from the teaching, but from the practice of having to do those kinds of things, and then in the business world having to do those kinds of things too.
yeah. Yeah, that's how it was for me, which like I told you when we've chatted is after my NDE, I thought, wow, I wasted most of my life studying business and marketing and finance. And never in a million years would I have thought, oh, well, I can do marketing for spiritual events and market spiritual teachers and never in a million years. So, but now I'm grateful. It's like, I'm glad I didn't give it up and I'm glad I learned it.
Well, and I also was blessed enough to be able to be successful to the point where I could put away my retirement package and now I've been retired for a little over a year, and support myself through that without having to ask people to pay for things, just like my certification program. I put all the money into that. I've not collected a dime. I haven't sought to, but I just did it as a public service. If I couldn't afford to, it'd be different. Um, but that's been a very helpful thing, not only for the sitters who want to get a reading from somebody who's been vetted, but for those mediums themselves. They really want that certification because, you know, it's like we've talked about, it's a tough thing out there. Like they're always being bashed and put down and having to deal with skeptics and things. So having that to give them lend some credibility is an important thing to them. And I'm glad to be able to give that to them. And they've earned it. If they pass, they've earned it because it's not easy. They have to go through 4 of those blinded readings, generating statistically significant events. Um, I mean, results, scoring like 75 or higher, which is kind of a combination of accuracy and evidence and things. So, and I'll share a little bit with you too about my own experiences because I do know I have this down in here somewhere,
Right.
to some degree. I just have not tried to consistently work on it or work at it. I did go to a workshop, ironically, in Maui that was last November. It was put on by Tony Stockwell and Lynn Probert, who are 2 mediums from the UK.
My
And
friend Nicole, can't think of her last name. She was the one that put it on. I was gonna go to it,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I too busy. But
But anyhow, so I go through this and I did really well. They break us into groups or like you have a one-on-one with somebody and they ask us to do different things. And so it's surprising when you do it because you think, am I just imagining this stuff or is this real? But you kind of have to let yourself go. You get into kind of a semi-meditative state. And for me, I would get images or thoughts or feelings. And then you find out, wow, a lot of this is right on the money and it's kind of telling them the way it is. And so what I really wanted to know as much as anything, like what are the mediums experience? How does it work for them so that I can better understand their world and what they're going through? So I get back from that and I'm like, hey, I have to keep this going, do some practice readings for friends and people just so that I don't lose what I gained. And so I contacted one of the mediums that I think to be one of the very best that I've seen in the world. Her name's Farah Gibson. She's in Gilbert, Arizona. I'm like, hey, Farah, I just went to this thing and I'm not like trying to be a practicing medium or anything, but I'd like to, I'm just trying to work on this and see what my capabilities are. Could I give you a practice reading? She goes, oh, I'd love that. I've never had a reading from anyone. I've only given readings. I'm like, okay, cool. So we set up the date. And 2 days before that, I was pulling my car in the driveway and I thought, oh, I have to do this thing for Farah in 2 days. I hope I get something. And immediately in my mind, this idea popped in. It was pie, that pie. And I got cherry pie. All right. So I wrote it down. And then 2 days later, just before we started, I wrote down some other stuff. I was trying to kind of get in a meditative state that I thought may be relevant. So we started, and I said, well, before I go any further, the first thing I got was cherry pie. And she goes, "You got to be kidding me." I'm like, "No." So we went through the whole reading and it was really good. But at the end, she goes, "Okay, I'll tell you about the cherry pie." She goes, "So before we ever got this started, I thought I'm going to throw Mark a curveball." So I put out a mental request to my stepmom, who we never really got along very good. But I said to her, "You have to be the first one to go to Mark with something that I will clearly recognize." So then she later sends me this picture. She goes, "I've only received one gift from my that stepmom, and I still have it today. It's the only gift I've ever received from her, and it's this." So that's a cherry pie dish, I guess, and it's got a cherry pie recipe on it. So anyhow,
nice.
so that's the other piece of this that I've come to understand is how subtle some of this stuff can be. It's like I get this idea of cherry pie, I could easily just blow it off and say that's stupid.
Right.
But yet sometimes those are the biggest hits.
Exactly. The ego always
And
wants to trick us and say, "Oh, you're making that up. You don't know what you're
yeah.
talking."
And I know a lot of people who've had NDEs end up with abilities after they come back too. It kind of expands. I think that happened to you, didn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Mine started between NDEs, and
Hmm.
but then got a lot stronger after the last NDE.
And it's interesting too, like people that do this research on the mediums, like Dr. Julie Beisel at Windbridge has noted, like a lot of them have trauma in their lives, of some sort. And I know my dad did as a kid. Um, his father didn't really like this or accept it very much, and he took some whippings from it, I think, as a kid. And so it caused him to like retract more and go into nature and spend more time by himself. And I think that really probably made it blossom even more. So there, I don't think I touched on this. You asked about my dad in the beginning, and I kind of bolted over this, but let me go back to his childhood. So I interviewed my grandmother shortly after my dad had passed, and I wanted to know more about his growing up years. And she told me that she first observed this characteristic in him as early as age 3, because they lived in rural Ohio, didn't have a telephone or anything, and no TV. And my dad would just know things, and they were always correct. So, like, one of those things was, Grandpa's coming. And every time he said Grandpa's coming, well, Grandpa would be there, 10 minutes later or 15 minutes later, whatever. It was like clockwork. And she even started planning meals for when, Dad would say that, or, planning for them to be there. But the big event was when he was 5 years old. He went into the Columbus, Ohio Children's Hospital for corrective surgery on his eyes because he was born cross-eyed. And after the surgery was conducted, they had his eyes cupped and bandaged so he wouldn't touch them. And that actually restrained him to a bed. And this one nurse felt sorry for him and said, I'll let you up if you promise not to touch the bandages. So he agreed. She went on her rounds and came back, and then she saw him bouncing a ball against the wall and catching it. She thought, oh my God, he's taken the bandages off, but he hadn't. So that was kind of like the beginning for my father in terms of them realizing they got a different kind of kid here, And then they put him in a bed at the hospital and put somebody in front of him and someone at the doorway and said, okay, who's standing in front of you now? And he would get that right every time. And so those were the early days of his childhood and how it was kind of discovered in the family. And then his real interest took off when he was like 12, 13 years old. He was in a nearby neighborhood and he stumbled into a spiritualist camp called Woolley Park. And 2 weeks before this, he had lost his best friend. I think the timing's right. I may be off, but shortly before this, his best friend, Melvin McCarthy, I think was his name, Melvin McCarty, had died in a car accident. And so he goes into this church, and the woman hands him a piece of paper. And he says, well, what do I do? She goes, well, just write a question on there. And he goes, well, I don't know what to write. She goes, well, just write a message, please, and then your name, and then fold up the paper. So he did that. He sat down, and then a man came out and stood at a pulpit, put blindfolds on, and then they collect all the papers and gave them to the man. And the once the man started taking the papers, he felt them and he was giving messages out to people. He got to my dad and he says, Richard Ireland. My dad said, here. And he says, well, Richard, I've got a young man that comes to me here, but he's giving me an unusual name. And he says that name is Paisy. Well, my dad and this boy had secret code names for each other that they'd share when they were playing in the creek. And that kid's secret code name that no one else knew was Paisy. So my dad's blown away and he's like really intrigued. And then the man went on to say, young man, I'm very impressed with you, and someday you're going to be doing what I'm doing. And then that man ended up later mentoring my father, like when he was 17 years old. So those were the early years of my dad and kind of how that all evolved for him. He met my mom when he then went on to seminary with the National Spiritualist Association of Churches and then became a traveling minister. And then he demonstrated his abilities in various churches. He was coming, one of his stops was in Phoenix, and my mom lived in Los Angeles at the time, but her parents lived in Phoenix. So my grandmother said, Shirley, you need to come to Phoenix and see this traveling minister. I hear he's exceptional. So she comes there and he's doing demonstrations Saturday and Sunday. And then I guess Saturday night, the minister said, oh, Shirley, would you be open to a blind date with our guest minister? And she says, sure. And then that's how they met, and they were crazy about each other, and they got married pretty quickly. And I was a couple years after that.
You know what's amazing? I've been leading sharing groups ever since 2019 when I first started this because I wanted to talk to other people having these experiences. And I haven't met anybody yet that hasn't had these experiences, um, that some sort of trauma, loss,
Mhm.
something wasn't the precursor to this.
Well, it's too easy to settle in this world into just focusing on the worldly stuff, the stuff that we're told to value, the money, the fame, whatever it is, the importance of the business world, career. I I have a neighbor who's I think he's 81, and he sent me this thing. It was an article about being lost after losing your career due to retirement, not knowing what to do with yourself and being all depressed. And he basically said that's him. And I'm like, well, you know what? I have a really balanced life. I have a lot of stuff going on. And I never, there was a period of time there where I was really, really into my career, but I do not define myself as my career. It's a part of my life, it's a piece of my life, but it's not who I am. Who I am is something completely different. And I have a lot of varied interests. And I guess that rolls into the five pillars of healing if you're ready for that.
Yeah.
So,
But just real quick before we go to that, just one other thing. How has Brandon guided you in this direction? I'm just curious to see what part he's played in it in your communication with him.
well, a lot of it's been my dad, and Brandon and him seem to be together a lot. In the communications I've gotten from the mediums and even in dreams and things, he's been part of this. I think, you've heard the term old soul. I think Brandon was that because he and is that. Uh, just judged by the characteristics that he had as a person, very understanding, not looking to be recognized, but just putting other people first, embracing kids who were not popular to be friends and caring about them, going the extra yard for someone who was hurting or in pain, all those kinds of attributes. I think he was an advanced soul, and he was only going to be here for a short period of time. Um, which my uncle told me, I remember he says, I know it's very hard that he passed, but think you had 18 years with him, and you wouldn't replace that for anything. And that's true. So I think that he has a role in that too. And I think I just feel like there's a bigger picture to all of this. And most NDEs probably think
Yeah.
that way too. Like, this is just a little piece of something much bigger and much grander. And we're all working together to maybe advance consciousness in the world and to bring people and let them know that, there's a purpose for you being here. Life is worth living. There's a reason for life. Enjoy it, but also, trying to do and be kind to other people and do all the stuff that, are talked about in the churches that people don't always live.
Right. And also when you first told me about Brandon's experience, you know, I've had asthma my whole life, and I know what
Mhm.
that's like to be in the desert with one of those storms that come up and you can't breathe. But I also know that somehow I have miraculously survived. And so I just remember that story when you were telling me. It's like it was pretty clear to me how it was all meant to be that way. And that's
Yeah.
how you would say that you feel.
I think, there's probably nothing I could do to stop it. Even though I had that premonition feeling that
Right.
morning, it was probably more to prepare me and make me reflect on that after the fact. Had I done something aggressive to stop him, and it crossed my mind, I don't mean
Plus,
aggressive
you asked him
physically,
not
but
to
just,
go, right?
pardon?
You asked him not to go.
I did ask him not to
Yeah.
go, but I thought of even sharing a carrot for something that he wanted to try and keep him from going. I thought, that's manipulative, and he's 18 years old. But, had I done that, maybe he would have died a week later or 2 weeks later in a much worse way. He was doing what he enjoyed doing. He was on that mountain. He climbed that mountain all the time with buddies. And I know he was peaceful because even though things weren't right when he laid down, he told his buddy, oh, he vomited and he says, oh, I got some in my hair. He was joking about it. And then he says, I got to lay down. And then he just laid down. And so I don't think that he knew what was coming at that moment. And I think probably when we pass, maybe, that recollection of anything that happened before our embodiment probably comes back pretty slowly. I don't know. It might be a gradual process. Or maybe
Yeah.
for some it's instantaneous. I don't know. And again, I'm assuming that we existed before this, and that's based on, my buying into the idea of pre-soul planning, but also, the idea of reincarnation, which is a lot of research conducted there that makes a lot of sense as well.
And he was confused for a few minutes when he crossed over, wasn't he?
That's what my uncle said. I mean, that he's like, well, okay, what's going on? And then my dad's like there. And I think when he saw my dad, and I had several people actually tell me that when he saw his dad, his grandpa, he knew like, oh, okay, this is, I'm not in that body anymore. I'm somewhere else. You know.
Yeah. So do you feel that he then later, you had the 6 month period later when do you feel that he played a part in guiding you towards the helping parents heal and what you were like did he directly inspire you or lead you that way that you know of?
I think that was kind of something that was on the roadmap to happen. His role in that, it's hard to say for sure, but I know a lot of the members of Helping Parents Heal feel like our kids have a hand in what's evolved with that whole organization.
Yeah.
That, it's been an important thing. It's a worldwide thing. And it tells me too, like we talked too about the science before and how it's been such an uphill struggle to get academia to look into these things, or even the people that do to take them seriously, because they're trying so hard to preserve materialism and the idea that consciousness is generated by the brain as opposed to transmitted through the brain. Um, so I feel like this is a grassroots kind of movement, and people won't stand for that forever. That you could, Richard Dawkins, you could tell me whatever you want, but I know what's real because I've experienced it. And you can believe that you're nothing at all other than dust if you want to think that. I'm not going to change your mind, but you're not changing mine either because I know what I've experienced.
Right.
And people at the grassroots level are going to go forward. And that's what's happened with Helping Parents Heal. People have had these experiences, they've been healing and helpful to them, and they're living full lives because of it, joyful lives where I've seen people who didn't go through that healing process that are still stuck where they were a decade before.
Yeah.
And some of them just go into a corner and stay there, which is really sad.
Do you get many parents that come complete skeptics, but they're so desperate to try anything? Or what would you say is kind of the average parent that is willing to join parent helping parents heal and be
Well,
open?
first off, and Doris, who's on our board and who's our legal counsel, would side with me on this. We don't have a dogmatic position on anything. We are just making available for people to discuss these things. That's what differentiates us from the other uh, bereaved parents organizations. We allow the open discussion of spiritual experiences, but we don't take a position on them. Now, individually, we do. I obviously believe in the validity of mediumship and other forms of phenomena that demonstrate life goes on with our personality and spirit, soul, self, whatever term you choose to use after physical death. But the organization doesn't claim that. But we do provide speakers and presenters who share those things. So to answer your question, now that I give you that preface there, I would say you see people from all walks of life, but the one thing they have in common is whatever their worldview was before, it's typically shattered and broken open so that they can open their mind to thinking differently and considering things that they didn't before. Whether they were maybe religious in a fundamentalist way before, where they would reject these things, even though a lot of it's in scripture, there's plenty of miracles and spirit communication talked about in various books of the Bible. But they've been taught like, oh, these things are bad, stay away from them.
Right.
um, Now that's shattered. I know some of our good friends in Scottsdale had, gone back to their church after this, and they were really not given any help at all. And were kind of, nobody would talk to them, and they got really sad and depressed. And then people would just try and preach at them. And so they met us, and they're like, forget that. Let's go hang with the Irelands tonight. I want something upbeat. So, and then the people that are atheists, some of them, I've seen them come around too, where they got evidence that was like, whoa, no one could make that up. Um, just from a variety of ways, but I'd say when we'd have mediums that would present and do gallery readings at some of the meetings and share things with parents that would change their way of thinking and give them new insight. So I would just say it kind of cracks them open to where, look, they're in pain, their world is shattered, and their way of thinking of the world, their worldview, is not necessarily as solid as it was before, and they're willing to look at new things and consider new things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how we think that we know everything, right? And then and how things are going to be. And then these situations come up and remind us that we don't know anything. And that's
Yeah.
where I think that's when the magic happens. I've had those kind of experiences my whole life. And I just had one 2 years ago with my best friend here. I had a shared death experience with him. I and he was the one person in a body here on Oahu that I could talk about anything. And he didn't he'd watch our stuff sometimes, but he didn't necessarily come. And he actually asked me, is it okay? Like he actually had a choice. Do I cross over or not? But he wanted to cross over because he was a caretaker for his family and he's Japanese. And here, the Japanese culture, the oldest son is basically takes care of the family, whether they want to or not. And the thing that was interesting is so I've already had all these NDEs and all this stuff, but going through this experience, what was shocking to me is that reminder once again, I still know nothing. And even if you know that they're in a better place because you experienced it with them, there's that emotional connection that we as humans want
Yeah.
that you don't have and you miss.
One thing I've read about the NDE experience, and I've not had one, but that tells me something, and that is it seems like when people cross over or they're out of their body, they feel a sense of peace and this immense love, and they no longer feel pain, they don't feel anger, they don't feel fear. Um, and that tells me those characteristics might be brain generated, and the natural state of us may be that more euphoric state.
Yeah.
So you could probably speak to that better than me.
Well, I believe that is our natural state.
Yeah.
And me and a lot of NDErs, I've always studied A Course in Miracles, but I never got it until I had my NDE. And a lot of the truth in that thought system, whether they know it or not, NDErs will speak it. And it is true that um, it actually says there that, our natural state is joy and miracles are natural, whereas here miracles we don't think of them as natural. But if they don't happen, then something's gone wrong. And it's always our thoughts and our beliefs that prevent us from experiencing that complete absolute love.
Mhm. Well, I haven't gotten to the five pillars. Can I hit those real
Yes,
quick?
please.
Okay.
Yes.
And this is really just, I'll just briefly share them. These are just my observations from having worked with Helping Parents Heal for more than a decade and seeing people come in a very down and out way and then getting built up and either leaving in a much healthier and more joyful way or staying engaged, but having healed to a large degree. That doesn't mean the hole in your heart's ever gone or that you don't think of your kids. I think of Brandon every day, but that you're able to function, you're able to live a full life and experience joy again. So the first pillar is support and help from family and friends. If you can get that, not everybody has that kind of a family, but if you have that, that's a real plus. And family won't always want to talk about your child who passed or your loved one who passed, but you need to let them know that you like to, and that's a positive for you to talk about your loved one. Second is to meet people who have been through the same thing because they can relate to you in a way no one else can. And we can come in that way, helping parents heal and provide that because of all of our members and people who attend our events have been through that. So you'll form new friendships. They'll be very valuable and helpful to you. The third is service. And not everyone can dive into providing service immediately, but at a point when you're far enough along, if you can provide service to others, it comes back to heal you too, whether that's working a soup kitchen or getting involved in an organization that raises funds for the homeless or cancer research or whatever, something that's important to you. Or maybe a lot of the parents get involved with things that had to do with how their child passed, and fundraisers for those kinds of things. But the idea that service is a good thing. The fourth one is one of the toughest, and that's really guilt and or forgiveness. And a lot of us will blame ourselves and say, I should have done this, I should have done that, I could have prevented it. Why didn't I do that? Just like me talking about my son, the day that I had that thought, why didn't I stop him? But the other side of that is, holding anger or lack of forgiveness for someone that you hold responsible for that passing. And that's not an easy thing to do. And I understand that it's a very difficult thing, but really that is it hurts you too, because it's something that's hanging on that's like a almost a cancer inside you by having that held there, that anger, that frustration. Um, but then the last pillar is the one we were just talking about, and that's the evidence for there being more, for consciousness surviving physical death. The hope element, I call that. So it's not the only thing, but it's a piece of the puzzle, and it's one that I've seen kind of push people over the edge. It's the big piece that gets people onto a path where they can actually heal and move forward because they have hope. They're not lost. They feel like, okay, I know my kid in some form still exists and is able to connect, and that makes me feel joy. And this is a short life. They went out of order from our human perspective from when I thought I would go, but I'm going to be going at some time too, so it's just it's just part of the process of a human life. So I think we have a whole bunch of questions stored up, so maybe we better dive into those before we go too much longer.
Yeah, and also I just wanted to ask real quick, do you know who Joe and Beth Wilson are?
I
Because
don't think so.
they would be awesome speakers for helping parents heal. They spoke to our group several years ago, and both parents, they were in a car wreck with all their kids, and all the kids were killed. And the kids started coming to them and to him through normal mediumship ways, but through her when she was sleeping. And it was a fascinating story. And for some reason, it just dawned on me. It's like, yeah, they would be great to speak at helping parents heal.
Yeah, I
So
know we've had Jeff Olson, who was I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a good one for that too. And then Dr. O'Driscoll. I don't know if you've talked
right,
to Jeff
they're both from
O'Driscoll.
Salt Lake City, which is where I was born.
Yeah,
So both of them have something to do with me doing what I'm doing. Yeah.
yeah, they're
So
both
I know.
great guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they are.
So
And
should we tackle the questions
yeah,
now?
so let's go. Okay, so I'll read you the questions unless you've been seeing some that are like screaming out to you. But I wanted to make it easy for you that you don't
Yeah,
have to.
just go down them. I saw them flash on the screen, but I was in the middle of talking, so I couldn't really read them.
Yeah. So the first one, which is probably the one of the most important, is because can everyone learn how to be a medium, or at least learn how to connect with their own loved ones who've crossed over?
So my answer to that is um, anyone can learn to connect. The issue is, the methodology you're going to use and will you believe it? That's part of it. That's part of the reason people go to mediums because they're getting information from somebody else that knows nothing about their loved one and it makes sense. So they're like, okay, now I know I've got him. But you yourself, if you sit there, and I've had many connections with my son, you're going to question it. So you have to let go of that doubt and that question. There are a number of people who provide guided meditations to try and connect, and those are great. Suzanne Giesman, I think, has some. Suzanne Wilson has some. You can go to their websites or
Yeah.
just do a Google search for, after death communication meditation. Um, but yeah, as far as being a medium, I I agree that anyone has the potential, but in varying degrees. Okay. And when I test people too, I see this. There are some people that are deluded. They think they have ability that's more than what they have, or they really don't have it. There are other people that are exceptional. They're just born that way. My dad was one of those. And there's people in the middle. So I think my short answer to the question is everybody can play piano, but not everybody's going to be Mozart, and,
That's a
and that's the thing, you may be able to play chopsticks and that might be it. So
really.
um, I think you got to be honest with yourself, but be open too. So if this is something that interests you and you're doing it for the right reasons, you want to serve, then pursue it and see if it develops for you. And most people like that, a lot of them will already have had experiences to some degree. So they kind of know they've got it, but they haven't really worked on it or developed it. But I've given you a case of mine that was pretty strong. I had another one. Um, I'm not going to touch on that. It'll take too long. But I'd say if you've already had experiences and you seem to be able to give people information that makes sense or predict things that have come to pass, then go ahead and look into it,
Right.
Um, what else do we have there?
Okay, so bear with me just a sec. Have you ever heard of something? I think it's called theremin. Somebody wants to know. I don't normally go down that road, but somebody wants to know if you know about. Does that ring a bell to you?
No,
Theremin.
is that like a hallucinogen or something?
I was gonna Google it. Probably is theremin. If anybody knows what theremin is, Marina,
I
just
don't.
type your
It's a
question.
musical instrument.
Yeah, just type whatever you're gonna say in the chat, and then we can go. We can do that way. So anyway, so we'll go. Anyway, it's just something about using and how do you feel about that? Because I personally and everything I do, um, I love what Ram Dass says. He says hallucinogenics can let you visit God, but you always have to come back. Whereas, developing these and connecting with true love, you can actually be with God, or however you want to term those terms.
Someone just wrote that the theremin is a musical instrument that helps bring you to an REM state. I'm unfamiliar with it, so I can't really comment. But I'd say anything that can naturally do that's great to try. I know some people use those ringing bowls and things like that. It's worth trying to see if it works for you. I know my dad in one of his writings, he was not a big advocate, although I know that he used peyote or mescaline once, and he had a very profound experience meeting his father on the other side with that. But in general, he advocated the longer, harder, more diligent process of
I
using meditation and natural practices. But for some people, maybe it helps them. I know that in terms of PTSD and things like that, they're finding a lot of research now with some of the hallucinogens are proving to be helpful. And I know um, there's a neuroscientist recently that was a hardcore materialist, but then did ayahuasca, and now all of a sudden is very interested in consciousness and very open-minded to, what consciousness really is and how it works. So I don't think it's a one size fits all answer. And we kind of got off because someone was asking about a musical instrument, but nonetheless, this was a natural place to go.
Yeah. Yeah. So to whoever asked that question, yes, I do know people that use instruments to do that stuff. One of them, I don't think she's here tonight, but her name's Karen Michelle. And she's actually doing a workshop at the IANDS conference about that. So yeah. Okay, so let's go to
Yes, I know of the Monroe Institute. I just saw that pop up. Hemisync. I've not done that myself. I'm interested in it. Dr. Eben Alexander was involved with that for a while. But
Robert Monroe was supposed to be here tonight, not the one
yeah,
he may be here too, but his nephew, Robert Monroe, was gonna be here tonight. I don't know
I
if he
see.
I don't know if he stuck in or not.
There
Uh,
are different practices that work for different people. So, that may well be an effective way to go. I don't know where it could hurt to try that.
yeah, exactly. But the thing about the music, by the way, just to answer what I know, is anything that's going to raise your vibrations into feeling love and joy. I mean, that's when we're most connected, is when our vibrations are up. At least for me, that's when I'm most connected with spirit. But if I'm in judgment or negativity or whatever, I'm less connected. So I guess really anything that just makes you feel better.
My
Uh,
dad always felt that people who are artists or got into artistry, whether that be music or creating art, painting, sculpting, or whatever, that is a bridge to the spiritual experiences. And
yeah,
I write music. I play in a band. I play guitar. So and I especially feel that when I'm composing, even more than playing. But that does elevate me, I think, at times. And even the way I got the lyrics that I put together, I think sometimes those were inspired. You talk about my son. I think he shared some of those lyrics with me in one of the songs I shared with you.
oh right, yeah. When we put the replay on YouTube, put the song. I think that'd be great if you did that in the comments if you want to share it.
Yeah, it's if people look it up, it's on Spotify and all those. It's the Mark Ireland Experiment, and the song in particular that I'm thinking about is I can remember the song, um, "What You Can't See." "What You Can't See" by the Mark Ireland Experiment. Or if you go to my website, there's a link to my music on there. It's a little hard to find. It's not on the homepage. It's on the others and there's a bunch of bullet point links on the right side. But you could just look up on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, the Mark Ireland Experiment, the song "What You Can't See."
Yeah, so go ahead and keep putting your questions in the chat. I'm just going through and trying to get rid of comments. Let's going to and let's not go into the discussion about drugs and stuff because that's not what we're about here. Um uh so
Thanks, Trista.
what is the biggest way that you would say that your life has changed in
Just
all this?
just redirected, you know. I'd say it's fuller, it's more meaningful. Being able to serve and help more people and to do something that I love and that is enjoyable to me and is of great interest to me.
And do you feel that because you believe in life plans that this was your plan, but you had to go do the other stuff, the worldly stuff, and experience all the other stuff to then it's almost like the hero's journey in a way to come back.
Yeah, when we talk about the soul plan thing, I'd say that's my inclination is to subscribe to that way of thinking. I don't look at that as like, oh, this is an exact thing and everything's going to happen for a reason exactly this way. I don't think murders happen for a reason, but that's my opinion, you know. I think that we have a general roadmap of our life and that we may veer off of it at times. It's like being in a creek that diverts off of a river, but then it's going to rejoin that river at some point in time. But yeah, and I think in general that yeah, I had a path to follow. I followed it. This is how it was supposed to go. That's how I feel about it. It just seems to there have been too many synchronicities to get me to this point. And what it's brought me is a very fulfilling life, and a lot of great friendships.
Yeah, actually, you just brought up a really good point. And of course, this is going to be based on your personal experience. But you personally believe that what you said about murders, but what about people that commit suicide? Or what would you say is the prevailing wisdom at helping parents heal when people have joined where a child has committed suicide?
Well, from the parents' perspective, it's one of the hardest things for them to deal with because they often blame themselves and think that they could have stopped it. We all think that no matter how our child passed, like we could have done this, it could, but that one is even more extreme that way. You know, as far as what happens to the soul of the person after they pass, that's a matter of personal opinion. I just think what it might mean is that someone, either it was their time and they chose to go that way, or maybe, it was, they had more on the plate to do or complete, and they didn't fulfill that out of their own choice, of their own free will. And then maybe they would have the option to come back in another reincarnation and finish that later, or maybe in another plane of existence. I don't know. But as far as how it affects the parents, it's usually one of the tougher ways.
Yeah, yeah. Um, would you say that based on what you've seen in helping parents heal, seeing lots of different experiences, in most cases, was there some sort of a plan about the suicide? And then I think also the big thing is, was there any punishment or anything talked about that? Because as you know, traditional Christianity or whatever talks about punishment.
Yeah, again, we don't take a dogmatic position on anything. We just present information. We have people that talk about their opinions of things, and I would say the general consensus among most of the people that are part of helping parents heal is that there's not any judgment or punishment for someone who does that, as opposed to traditional religious beliefs. But again, that's not an organizational perspective because we don't have one. That would
Right.
be that would be kind of the view of most of the people that are in the group, that it is something, there are reasons for it too, that, like mental illness, people are born with a mental illness or bipolar condition and things like that they can't cope with. So do you blame somebody for that? And it's um it's a tough topic to go down, especially when you start looking at it from that perspective. But we're just there to support people and help them. And if they've gone through something like that, we're there to be a helping hand to them.
Right. Yeah, I was just more curious based on your observation, because I know that helping parents heal, like Hawaiian IANDS, we don't proselytize or say it's this way or that way. But but we do observe on what the general, based on speakers and coming to the sharing groups, what they have experienced. So that's
What I would say is the mediums that we've had present that are good evidential mediums are typically going to convey that they're able to communicate with that soul, and that soul is not suffering or in judgment or anything like that.
yeah. That's what I was.
Okay.
I was looking for confirmation, but I wasn't going to guide you that way. In just
Gotcha.
that is what they most people say. So far I have never had a speaker or an experiencer who has said there was some sort of judgment. It's more like, in fact, I've likened it to, like, when you're in college and you don't pass the class, and instead of getting a failing grade, you just get an incomplete. You come to it again, like whatever it is you didn't learn, or maybe you were done learning. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons that it could be, but
Yeah.
it's
I
still,
mean, somebody might quit school early and just go do something else
yeah,
and then later regret it because it's like, well, I'm going to go back to school now and finish that, you know?
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, but at the end of the day, people aren't judged the way that scripture tends to teach, it seems.
Well, I don't want to put religion down, but there are religious tactics that have been used, to use fear as a tool for compliance. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Um, so Regina says, I struggle with the idea that I'm being punished for not being a good enough parent. Any advice?
Oh, I see. So they're feeling like God took their child to punish them for not being a good enough parent.
Yeah,
Is
Regina,
that right?
did you have a child that passed? Maybe you can do a thumbs up or something on your post or somewhere.
Okay, yes. You're not being punished. Look, I know it feels like a horrible punishment, having been there myself. This world is a temporary place. We're all here for a short period of time. We think that we know the order we should go in or that we prefer, and it doesn't always work out that way. You know, I found what I would say is that most of the people who have had kids pass young, these kids have a lot of they're like advanced souls oftentimes. It seems like they don't need to be here that long, they're already on the way there. They're there to help us kind of push us over the hump.
Mhm.
So don't blame yourself. That there's no point in that. Um, you can't question that. Be grateful for the time you had. And if maybe you want to try and do some of the connection processes we talked about. I know one thing that I did that worked great early on was I had one night I went to bed and I prayed for a connection to Brandon, a visit. And I prayed that I would remember it the next day. So don't forget that part. And go there with an open heart and make that prayer, that request. That night, I met Brandon and it was more vivid than waking reality. And we were in a room with three white walls. And where the fourth wall should have been was just empty. It was infinity. It was like the rest of the universe. And there he was, as vivid as could be. And we chatted for a second. And it was like a glowing room, all white. And that just really, really touched me. Well, about last fall, I think it was, I got an email from a woman, and I don't remember the page number, but I'll just throw one out. She goes, the title of the email was um, Soul Shift, page 128. And so I opened up, she goes, I had this experience recently and I always question if it was real or not. And then I got to page 128 in Soul Shift. She goes, I had the exact same experience. I met my son in a three-walled white room. There was no fourth wall. It was the rest of the universe. And so that was pretty cool. That was confirmation for me too.
Yeah.
So that's another way you can do that in a dream state. And I think what's really good about that is it removes your conscious analytical mind from the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. And that's how, like I was telling you, my friends John and Beth Wilson, that's how she experiences her children, is through the dreams.
Okay.
And I've even had that with my friend that passed over, and I experienced the whole shared death experience. But his anniversary of crossing over is February like 16th. And so basically February 15th, I guess I was busy doing all kinds of other stuff. And so I wasn't even
Mhm.
thinking. And he actually came to me in a dream that night. And it was interesting because that just doesn't happen to me normally. And so yeah, they're gonna speak to us anyway that we will listen, it seems. Um Somebody wants to know, for people who may not have advanced mediumship abilities, do you think it is possible they aren't meant to experience that in their lives for a reason?
I don't know if it's for a reason. I just think we all have our own gifts and talents. And so we have to know what those are and figure out what those are. For some people, it might be that. Others, it might be a musical instrument. It might be teaching. It might be um, writing philosophy. It could be anything. I just think it varies by person. I don't think it's like saying, oh, you should not do this because you don't have it. But I think you put two and two together if say if you wanted to try it and you go to some training development workshop kind of thing, and you don't really see the results. Maybe it's not your bag. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's just like me, even though I think I could do this and I have it to some degree, it's not been I haven't felt like it's my primary calling, at least not yet at this stage of my life.
Well, yeah, and clearly your primary calling you are doing. And
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
something else also. It didn't come to you just big. So a lot of people, they say, I don't know what my purpose is. And they're waiting for this big grand plan that it's going to be all on golden tablets and do this, do this, do this. And I always talk about just no, it doesn't work that way. Follow the breadcrumbs. Like take this inspiration and this synchronicity or whatever you want to call it with this medium and this lady that already has a group. What would you say about that?
Well, that's exactly what happened for me. It's funny because one of the readings I had early on was, I'd say 8 months or 9 months after Brandon passed. It wasn't Alison Dubois, it was Linda Williamson. Linda Williamson was a pretty famous English medium, and I'd met her while how did I meet her? I met her through a third party. Anyhow, and one of the chapters in Soul Shift, my first book, features this. But in there, it's really remarkable because she says, she goes, there's a group of people on the other side and people here on the earth that have an interest in this field and in this afterlife evidence. And she goes, you're part of this. And she says, I see you are going to be part of a massive organization. But sometimes we think it should happen like right now or right then. We don't know when it's going to happen. So they're saying, just be patient. Just be patient. People will come to you. You'll just be yourself. You'll tell your story. You'll tell your truth, and it will just grow naturally. And lo and behold, that was it. Within like a year or two, I'm like, where the hell is this?
I
Yeah. And it
know
took
I had
longer.
an experience like that before because I was going to support groups for people that had had like terminal illnesses, and I really didn't understand what was all going on. And I got that message from because I've experienced which I told you about, you know, angels, ascended masters, whatever you want to call them, that can come into bodies. And so when that guy told me that I was going to be leading these big groups and telling my story, it actually scared me because I'm like the most reluctant messenger out there. And I was like, I don't want people thinking I'm crazy. Like, but there was this part of me that I knew he was right. But it took lots of baby steps, and literally following the breadcrumbs.
Yeah, that's what it's been in my case. I thought it would be big fast, and it wasn't, but it's big now.
Yeah, right. And yeah, and so that's, I think, the most important, one of the many important messages for people to know that are wondering what their purpose is. The purpose is just be present in the moment and listen to whatever that message is, which will lead you to the next one and follow the breadcrumbs, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I do lean on thinking there is something to the soul plan idea, because I wouldn't have had all these synchronicities line up for me to have breadcrumb trail to follow and for things to in some cases be so obvious, you
Right.
know. Yeah.
And
Do
that,
we have some more questions?
yeah. So is your vetting and certification program open to any medium or is it invite only?
No, it's open to any medium. I've had to slow it down a little bit just because it's just me and a volunteer, and we've been overwhelmed. I mean, we've had a wait list of like 15 people, and we're just barely chipping away at it because it takes a long time to do these tests. But it's open to people. So if there's a good quality evidential medium and they want to apply, they're welcome to apply. Just you, yeah, I have a separate website for that. But if you go to my website, markirelandauthor.com, that's Mark with a K, Ireland like the country, author, markirelandauthor.com, you'll find links to that certification website. You'll find links to Helping Parents Heal. You'll find links to my dad's videos, and my music too. So anything that you'd want to look at that we've talked about, you'll find links to it on that site.
So your dad's book that you published, um, have you ever done a little mini course or anything based on what he has in that book, psychic potential to help people?
Yeah, actually, even before the book was published, I put together a training program because I was asked to do workshops. I'm like, well, what am I going to do a workshop on? I said, well, I could teach my father's material. So I put that together in slide form. And most recently, I updated that. And the Theosophical Society approached me and had me do a talk for them. And then they asked me to do a workshop. And that's what I did it on. It went really, really well. I didn't know if it would work as well, on Zoom, but it did.
Yeah, that would be fun to do sometime because I know that, so many people would love to work on that and develop those skills more themselves. Because a lot of
Yeah.
NDEs, they will actually feel almost like, what's wrong with me? I came back and I don't have any gifts. I've had some people say that. And I think that that's usually a perception, but it's fun to help people in little mini workshops to get a little closer to that. So that would be kind of fun someday.
Yeah.
So to wrap up, I just want to thank you so much, and definitely um, I want you to come back and we can get more into the mediumship, and I think what would be cool also is some stories about how mediums and helping parents heal, how that's actually helped the parents and the people.
Sure. And I think I touched on that with the fifth pillar of the five pillars. But as far as the whole mediumship thing, I have put together a presentation that I could review with your group if you wanted. And it's on the best evidence for the afterlife. It touches on, the NDEs and those things, but it really dives deeper into the mediumship because that's my area of expertise. I'd be happy to review that sometime if you'd like.
Yeah, I think it'd be great. I think everyone who'd be interested in that, if you want to stick your thumb up or whatever, which I'm pretty sure everyone here wants to do it. So you research it and then yeah, see, there you go. And then
Well,
let me
thanks for
know.
inviting me today. I hope people enjoyed it, and it was great to be here. And we look forward to talking to you more in the future.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just so honored that that you came and that we, as I told you, Mark, but a lot of people don't realize, we've been Facebook friends for a long time. And then because of the Hawaii remote viewing thing that I was doing, I was then led to learn about your dad. And then I'm like, wait a sec, I'm Facebook friends with Mark. And it was
It's
like,
funny how
and
that
I'm like,
works.
he's so humble and unassuming and just a regular nice person on Facebook. And I was really impressed by that.
Well,
And
thank you.
yeah,
I think humility is an important trait.
yeah. So would you like to share whatever closing message you would like to share with everyone?
Just, I think I touched on it before, but just, I know a lot of people here have been through something difficult, and but I think there's a purpose for us being here, and to enjoy your life and live your life to the fullest, and you'll be glad that you did.
Great message. And for those of you that had questions that maybe weren't answered, when we put the replay up on the Hawaiian IANDS YouTube channel, make sure you're all subscribed there. And then you can ask questions of Mark in the comments, and he can come back and answer them if there was additional questions that you wanted answered. And with that, I'm so honored that we all actually spent this night together. And I didn't see anybody checking the news to see about elections or anything. So that's just wonderful. And I love you all. And I'm so grateful, Mark, for you speaking with us today, and for all the work you're doing. You're helping so many people and just doing amazing work. So it's an honor.
Thank you, Sean. You have a good one. Take care.
You too. Have a great night, everybody. See you soon. Aloha.
Aloha.